Rotting flowers wafted from a taxidermy cat's mouth as it exhaled beside Richard Moore. Its glass eyes reflected the bone-white street, but the shadow beneath it shifted, inhaling the scent of decay like a hungry thing. The cat clutched a severed finger between its teeth, the knuckle still glistening with dried blood. Richard's breath hitched, a sound too loud in the unnatural quiet. He'd been avoiding Main Street since the last crowd, the suffocating press of bodies, the way his own voice had turned to ash in his throat. Now this finger, this grotesque offering, felt like a lifeline. The low-frequency hum vibrated up through the pavement, a physical pressure against his soles, resonating in the marrow of the finger he'd just pried loose. The sickening sound of bone meeting stone, sharp and final. He pocketed the digit, the jagged edge catching his thumb. A fresh cut welled coppery on his skin. The taxidermy cat's shadow, cast by the weak sun, inhaled deeper, pulling the scent of rotting blossoms from its own preserved mouth. A needle dropped, sharp, precise, the sound of a record skipping right as his thumb grazed the new cut. He felt the needle's impact in his palm, a phantom echo of the finger's destruction. His pocket felt warm. He pulled out the light bulb, a small, ordinary one, its glass cool against his fingers. It flared crimson in the bone-white light, the glow searing his palm like a brand. Red, not the blood, but the light, the evil, the thing that made the shadows move. The cat's shadow shifted again, stretching toward him, the outline of its head inhaling the air like it was breathing in the rotting blossoms. Richard's own breath came in short, sharp gasps. He could feel the vibration in his teeth now, the hum filling the space between his ribs. The echo of footsteps in a space too small for them. Tap, 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 on the pavement behind him. He didn't turn. He couldn't. The light bulb pulsed crimson in his hand, the glow intensifying, burning into his skin. The heat was wrong, too hot for glass. The dried blood color of the pavement seemed to deepen, the bone white fading into the sickly pink of old wounds. He felt the cold seep into his pocket where the finger lay, a counterpoint to the light bulb's searing heat. Red, the light was red. The hum was red. The needle drop had been the sound of something breaking, and now the light was breaking into him. The pocket light bulb flared crimson, a living thing, a warning, a promise. The heat seared his palm, the skin blistering under the crimson glow. He couldn't let go of the light bulb. He couldn't let go of the finger. The shadow of the cat stretched further, the outline of its head reaching for his ankle, and he felt it then, a cold, wet grip on his ankle bone, the fingers of the shadow sinking into his skin. The light bulb's red glow seared his palm as he pocketed the finger. The finger in my palm was heavier than it had any right to be. Not the weight of bone. No, this was the weight of tovied expectation, like holding a note just before a singer's breath dies into the final held chord. My thumb traced the jagged edge where it had been torn free, and the copper taste flooded my mouth again, sharp as a stage knife left too long in the sun. The apartment smelled of it now, the metallic tang cutting through the rot of the taxidermy cat's exhalations. I'd propped it against the windowsill, its glass eyes fixed on the bone-white street beyond, but the shadow beneath it wasn't looking out, it was looking forward. The hum hadn't stopped, it was in my teeth now, a low-frequency vibration that made my molars ache. I'd pressed my ear to the wall earlier, half convinced I'd hear the heartbeat of the town itself, but all I got was the sound of my own pulse, slow and uneven like a metronome set to break. The cat's shadow stretched across the floor, its edges not quite aligned with the body of the beast. It breathed now. A slow inhale, the way the darkness under the bed deepened, thickened, as if the space itself were drawing breath. The exhale was worse, a wet, parchment, tearing sound like the peel of a wound, and the air in the room thickened with the scent of iron and something older, something that had been buried for decades. The finger in my hand pulsed once, just once, and I nearly dropped it. Beneath the bed, the sheets were still rumpled from where I'd kicked. The dust motes hung suspended, catching the sickly pink light from the street lamp outside, turning them into a swarm of tiny bleeding stars. I should have seen the hand sooner. The cold seeped through my sock first, a slow creep up my ankle, and then their pringers, not human, not quite right, wrapping around my bone like a vice. The pressure didn't come from the outside, it came from the inside, from the marrow, from the memory of the finger in my pocket. I kicked again, harder this time, and the impact sent a shower of dust motes spiraling into the air, each one a tiny glittering scream. The cat's shadow slithered forward, a thing of ink and hunger, its edges dissolving into the drain cover's shadow like smoke into water. The hum filled my chest, a physical weight, and I could feel the drain's mouth open beneath the cat, a black hole lined with teeth. The wet parchment sound came again, louder this time, the sound of something tearing free, and the drain cover rattled, a click as sharp and final like a gunshot in a theater. The hand, if it was a hand, released me. I didn't breathe. The cat's shadow didn't move. It waited. The finger in my pocket was warm now, too warm, and the light bulb in my other hand pulsed crimson, its glow bleeding through my skin like a second heartbeat. The drain cover trembled. The wet parchment sound came again, closer this time, the sound of something unfolding, and then a hand, pale as bone, slipped out from beneath the bed. Not the hand that had grabbed me. This one was different, thinner, longer. The fingers ended in points, like the tips of knives, and they curled around the drain cover's edge. The hum rose in pitch, a sound that wasn't just in my teeth anymore, but in my shoody bones, and the light bulb's glow seared my palm. The hand's knuckles were the same bone, white as the street, but the veins beneath the skin were red, thick with something that wasn't blood. They pulsed in time with the drain's wet breathing. The finger in my pocket, foot moved he. I didn't scream, I didn't breathe. The hand's fingers flexed, and the drain cover rattled again, a click that echoed like a gunshot. The shadow beneath the cat stretched, longer now, reaching for the hand, and the hand reached back, and the light bulb in my hand burned crimson, and the air in the room thickened with the scent of copper and something older, something that had been waiting for me all along. The hand's fingers curled around the edge of the drain cover, and the wet parchment sound came again. Louder this time, the sound of something tearing free, and the drain cover rattled, and the light bulb's glow seared my palm, and the finger in my pocket pulsed once, just once, and the hand's fingers flexed. And the cat's shadow stretched, and the hum filled my chest, and the drain cover trembled, and the wet parchment sound came again, and the hand's fingers curled, and the light bulb's glow seared, and the finger in my pocket pulsed, and the drain cover rattled, and the hand's fingers flexed, and the cat's shadow stretched, and the hum filled my chest, and the wet parchment sound came again, and the hand's fingers curled, and the light bulb's glow seared, and the finger in my pocket pulsed, and the drain cover trembled, and the hand's fingers flexed. And the cat's shadow stretched, and the hum filled my chest, and the wet parchment sound came again, and the hand's fingers curled, and the light bulb's glow seared, and the finger in my pocket pulsed, and the drain cover rattled, and the hand's fingers flexed. And the cat's shadow stretched, and the hum filled my chest, and the wet parchment sound came again, and the hand's fingers, fing-click, and the drain cover snapped shut. The hand was gone, the cat's shadow didn't move. The finger in my pocket was still warm. The light bulb's glow seared my palm, and the hum filled my chest, a low-frequency vibration that made my molars ache. And the drain cover rattled, and the wet parchment sound came again, and the hand's fingers curled, and the light bulb's glow seared, and the finger in my pocket pulsed. And the cat's shadow stretched, and the hum filled my chest, and the wet parchment sound came again, and the hand's fingers flexed, and the cat's shadow, click. The clipping was still warm when I found it, pressed between the pages of a newspaper I didn't remember buying. The ink wasn't just black, it was a bruise, a slow bleed across the paper, and when I touched it, the edges curled like scorched skin. Richard Moore found wandering ghost town claiming finger gift. The words pulsed once, just once, and the copper taste flooded my mouth again, thick and metallic. I hadn't tasted it in days, not since the cat brought it to me, not since the drain started whispering. I should have burned it, should have torn it into strips and let the wind carry the pieces into the teeth of the rusted-out street signs. But my fingers wouldn't obey. They unfolded the clipping carefully, as if handling something alive, and the edges of the paper resisted, like parchment stretched too thin. The ink didn't just print the words, it moved fluid, a faint, rhythmic throb beneath the surface like the heartbeat of something buried in the town's bones. The taxidermy cat was watching me from the windowsill. Its glass eyes had caught the light, but the reflection wasn't in the glass. It was in the sooty shadow. A flick of the tail, not the cat's, not the things, but the sooty shadows. A deliberate slow motion like a tongue licking its chops. The hum in my chest deepened, a low-frequency vibration that made the walls of the apartment groan in response. The drain cover rattled, a single sharp click high, and the light bulb near it flared white, too bright, too clean, like a spotlight in a theater where no one was watching. I didn't look at the drain. Organton had just printed. They were so concaved. The ink wasn't just ink, it was flesh. The letters had depth, ridges like fingerprints, and when I ran my thumb over them, they gave way slightly soft as muscle. The taste of copper filled my mouth again. I swallowed. The clipping pulsed once more, and the cat's shadow stretched across the floor, its edges dissolving into the drain cover's darkness like smoke into water. A single footstep echoed in the room. It wasn't mine. The apartment was too small for echoes. The walls were thin, the floorboards warped with age, and the only sound that should have been coming from the drain was the wet parchment, tearing breath of something waiting beneath the surface. But the footstep wasn't wet, it wasn't parchment, it was twiddry, a sharp, deliberate thud, like a boot heel striking concrete, and the vibration travelled up through the soles of my feet, through the marrow of my bones, straight to the back of my skull. The clipping trembled in my hand, the cat's shadow didn't move. The light bulb's glow seared my palm. I should have known. I should have felt it. But the only thing I felt was the weight of the clipping in my hand, the pulse of the ink beneath my fingers, and the slow, deliberate creak of the drain cover as it began to open. I didn't look down. I didn't breathe. The footstep came again. Closer this time. The clipping pulsed in my hand, and the ink bled across the paper, slow and deliberate, like a wound reopening. The cat's shadow stretched, longer now, reaching for the drain, and the drain cover rattled, a click sharp enough to make my teeth ache. The light bulb's glow seared my palm, and the copper taste flooded my mouth, thick and metallic. I looked at the drain. The light bulb's reflection wasn't mine. The face in the drain wasn't Richard Moore. It was thinner, longer. The lips didn't move, but the veins beneath the skin pulsed, thick with something that wasn't blood. The fingers curled around the edge of the drain cover, and the wet parchment sound came again, louder this time, the sound of something tearing free. The clipping pulsed in my hand, the footstep echoed in the room, the cat's shadow stretched, and the drain cover opened. The wet parchment sound came again, but it wasn't the drain itself. It was the air around it, a suction, like a lung drawing in a final ragged breath. The clipping's pulse had slowed, but the ink still throbbed, a dull ache against my thumb. I kept my gaze fixed on the porcelain, the chipped enamel stained with something that wasn't rust, something too viscous. The light bulb above the sink didn't flicker, didn't strain. It simply twiheld, a bone-white glare that bleached the color from everything. My ankle throbbed. A dull, insistent pressure, as if something had wrapped around it, tightened and then released. It hadn't been a touch, not exactly, more like a displacement of air, a cold spot settling on my skin. The floorboards beneath my feet weren't level. A subtle shift, a slow roll, and the sensation of standing on something that wasn't quite solid. The hum in the room had deepened, a low-frequency vibration that resonated in my teeth, and the metal of the drain cover felt cold, unnaturally so. The taxidermy cat hadn't moved, but its shadow had. It wasn't a gradual lengthening, not a simple extension of form. It was a foiling, a tightening, like a serpent preparing to strike. The shadow didn't stretch toward the drain. It became the drain, the edges dissolving into the darkness, the porcelain's rim a mere suggestion of a boundary, a slow, wet rasp against metal, and the scent of something ancient, something buried, filled the room. It wasn't decay, not precisely. It was a lack of completion, as if the thing had never truly formed, was still in the process of becoming. The siren's call wasn't a sound, not in the conventional sense. It wasn't audible. It was a vibration against the bone, a pressure against the eardrums, and the sensation of something scraping, bone against stone, inside my skull. The drain cover seemed to yield, to soften, and the wet parchment sound intensified, accompanied by a low guttural groan from the pipes. The copper taste returned, coating my tongue, and I could feel the blood in my veins slowing, thickening, becoming sludgy. I lowered my hand slowly, deliberately, and the clipping slipped from my grasp. It landed on the linoleum, the ink bleeding across the surface, and the image of Richard Moore's face seemed to distort, the features stretching, the eyes widening. The light bulb's glow intensified, and the white became almost unbearable, and I saw something in the drain, not a reflection, not an image, but a presence. A hand, pale, elongated fingers, webbed with blue veins, curled around the edge of the drain. The skin wasn't smooth, wasn't human. It was covered in a fine, almost translucent membrane, and the nails were black, brittle, and shaped like claws. The wet parchment sound reached a crescendo, and the drain cover lifted, a slow, agonizing groan, and the hand reached out, not toward me, but to and from me. It wrapped around my wrist. Not a grasp, not a squeeze. It was an adhesion, a bonding, as if my skin had dissolved, merged with the cold, slick flesh. The bone in my wrist protested, a sharp, stabbing pain, and the copper taste turned bitter, acrid. The taxidermy cat's shadow was gone, absorbed into the darkness of the drain, and the siren's call resonated in my skull, a chorus of voices, a cacophony of whispers, and the realization that the voice wasn't coming from the drain, but through me. The hand tightened. The porcelain cracked. The room spun, and the floorboards tilted, and I fell, not down, but tightened, the darkness of the drain swallowing me whole. The last thing I felt was the cold, slick flesh against my skin, and the sickening sensation of something else, something vast and ancient, reaching out to claim me. The clippings lay fanned across the counter, their edges curling like dead leaves, the ink bleeding at the corners as if the paper itself had wept. My fingers hovered over the stack, the heat of them too pronounced against the cold, brittle newsprint. The first was dated today. May 12th asterisk. And it was there, my face staring back at me. The same face I'd seen in the drain, its reflection, but sharper, more defined, as though the photographer had pressed their lens against my skin to capture the exact hue of my fear. The caption read, asterisk, Richard Moore. 38. Local man vanishes without trace again. Asterisk the word asterisk. Again asterisk. Wasn't he bolded? Wasn't he italicized? But it might as well have been written in fire. The second clipping was yesterday. Was identical except for the date. Rule, May 11th asterisk. And the third, the fourth, the fifth, all the way back to the first of the month. Each one a carbon copy, a stutter in time. My name was Richard Moore, but the byline beneath the photo wasn't mine. It was signed by someone who never met me, who knew the shape of my skull better than I did. The taxidermy cat sat on the windowsill, its glassy eyes fixed on the street below, where the cracked pavement glowed with a sickly, sun-bleached light. The shadow beneath it wasn't teat cast by the window, as frame. It was its own entity, a thing of coiled darkness that pulsed in time with something I could hear. The air above the counter vibrated not with sound, but with the weight of it, the pressure of a held breath. The light bulb above the sink had dimmed since the last time I'd been here, its glow reduced to a sickly bone-white radiance, as though the filament had stretched thin with the effort of burning. I exhaled, and the breath came out in a ragged hiss, like steam from a kettle left too long on the boil. My reflection in the counter, as polished surface wasn't mine. The first crack came without warning. Not from the glass, not from the wood beneath my fingers, but from the air itself. A sharp, clean snap, like a twig snapping underfoot, but louder, sharper, the kind of sound that made your teeth ache. The reflection didn't just flicker. It flit, a jagged line bisecting my face from temple to jaw. For a heartbeat, there were two of me, side by side, identical except for the eyes. Mine were dark, hollow, the irises swallowed by the black. The other were pale, milky, the whites veined with blue like the underside of a fish. The split widened, and the other Richard tilted its head slow, deliberate, the movement too fluid, too precise like a marionette. Yes, then it smiled. The teeth weren't mine. They were too white, too perfect. The kind of smile a doll might wear if it had been stitched too tightly. The shadow beneath the taxidermy cat lunged a whiff of darkness that lashed out from the windowsill, not toward the reflection, but toward me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. The thing in the mirror winked. The shadow hit my throat like a blade. Not a cut, not a tear. It was the sensation of something sharp dragging across my skin the moment before it would split me open. The pain didn't come. The pressure did. The weight of it. The wrongness of it. The way the air around me thickened, turned to syrup, slowed my breath to a crawl. The reflection in the counter didn't show me anymore. It showed 50. The thing with my face, my eyes, my smile, but not my voice, not my hands. Not the way my fingers trembled when I was afraid. The clippings on the counter rustled, the edges lifting as if something beneath them had stirred. The ink bled faster now, the black spreading like a stain, and the light bulb flared, a sudden blinding pulse of white that made my eyes water. The taxidermy cat, a shadow was in my mouth. Not a taste, not a touch. It was the sensation of something wet, something pooty olive, pressing against the inside of my cheeks, the roof of my mouth, the back of my throat. The thing in the mirror leaned forward. Its fingers, no, there were fingers curling into claws, the nails black, brittle, shaped like the things I'd seen in the drain. The clippings crumbled to dust. The counter groaned. The shadow's weight on my throat intensified, and I realized too late that the thing in the mirror wasn't too looking at me. It was looking through me. The hum resonated not in my ears, but in my teeth, a low, bone-deep vibration that set my jaw aching. It wasn't a sound, not precisely. It was a pressure, a density, as if the air itself were solidifying around me. The clippings rustled again. A dry, frantic whisper against the silence of the room, the ink blooming darker, the faces on the newsprint seeming to shift, to multiply. I blinked, and for a moment I saw not one Richard Moore staring back, but a dozen, 100, a swirling vortex of identical faces, each a fractured echo of my own. The taxidermy cat remained motionless on the windowsill, its glassy eyes reflecting the sickly bone white light. But the shadow beneath it wasn't still, it writhed, a black tendril reaching, probing like a restless thing seeking purchase. It wasn't cast by the cat, it was the cat, or something that had subsumed it. An oily darkness that pulsed with the same unsettling rhythm as the hum. I tasted metal, a faint coppery tang at the back of my throat, and the feeling of being watched intensified, a weight pressing down on my skull. The drain cover in the corner of the room, usually silent, began to rattle. A low, guttural grinding, like metal teeth gnashing against each other. It wasn't a violent tremor, but a slow, deliberate shifting, as if something were testing its grip, probing for release. The hum intensified, vibrating through the floorboards, up my legs, into my chest. I felt a phantom pressure on my ankles, a brief, icy grip that vanished before I could react. A sudden visceral wave of panic threatened to overwhelm me. The reflection in the counter's surface fractured again, not with a clean split this time, but a rippling distortion, like a stone dropped into a still pond. I saw myself. Yes, but superimposed over me were others, dozens of them, all with my face, my eyes, my hesitant expression. They weren't simply reflections, they were fiveations. Successively altered version of myself, some younger, some older, some subtly twisted, their smiles too wide, their eyes too vacant. The room seemed to expand, to warp, the walls receding into a dizzying perspective, the taxidermy cat looming larger, its shadow a consuming blackness. A voice, or rather a chorus of voices, began to coalesce from the hum. It wasn't audible in the traditional sense. It was a feeling, a pressure in my mind, 1,000 whispers pressing against the walls of my skull. Richard, Richard, Richard. The voices weren't accusatory or threatening, but expectant. They resonated with a strange, unsettling greed. The newspapers on the counter began to lift, swirling into a vortex of faces and dates, the ink bleeding into a dark, viscous pool. The light bulb above the sink flickered violently, threatening to extinguish itself entirely. The floor beneath my feet felt wrong. Not unstable, but Tyven familiar, as if the very substance of the room had shifted, rearranged itself to accommodate this burgeoning crowd of me. I stumbled, catching myself on the counter, the polished surface cold and slick against my skin. The drain cover rattled again, louder this time, a metallic shriek that pierced the hum. I looked down, and in the reflection I saw not my hands, but the hands of another Richard, identical to mine, reaching out from the drain. The taxidermy cat's shadow detached itself from the windowsill, slithering across the floor like a living thing. It moved with a disconcerting fluidity, a ripple of darkness that defied physics. It didn't stop, it lunged. Not at the reflections, not at me, but from me, a cold, viscous tendril that wrapped around my throat, stealing my breath. The pressure intensified, a crushing weight that threatened to collapse my lungs. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the hum, by the chorus of voices, by the multiplying faces in the mirror. The drain cover burst open with a deafening clang, a sudden violent expulsion of air that sent the clippings scattering across the room. The reflection in the counter dissolved entirely, replaced by a swirling vortex of faces, a chaotic kaleidoscope of Richard Moores, each one reaching, grasping, vying for space. The hum reached a fever pitch, a resonant drone that vibrated my bones, my teeth, my very soul. The taste of copper intensified, coating my tongue, filling my mouth. The shadow tightened its grip, and I felt myself being pulled, not forward, but toven downward, toward the gaping maw of the drain. 1,000 voices screamed my name, a unified, desperate plea. Join us. Richard, join us. The faces in the vortex blurred, coalesced, became one a single monstrous composite of every Richard Moore that had ever been, or ever would be. I saw my own eyes staring back at me, devoid of recognition, devoid of fear. The last thing I felt was the cold, wet embrace of the drain, the crushing weight of 1,000 selves, the suffocating silence of the hive. The center of Ghost Town was less a square and more a suggestion of one, a crater worn into the earth by decades of wind and neglect. Buildings leaned against each other like weary travelers, their windows' vacant eyes staring out at a sky the color of bone. The taxidermy cat, perched on a crumbling stoop, followed me with its glassy gaze. Its shadow, a viscous black stain, stretched and writhed on the cracked pavement, a separate entity mimicking its movements. It tasted like ash in my mouth. Each footfall on the uneven ground produced a hollow thud, a sound too precise, too deliberate for the desolation surrounding me. It wasn't the echo of my own weight, but a chorus of impacts, a multitude of footsteps keeping pace. The hum, a constant pressure behind my teeth, intensified. It felt as if the very ground were vibrating, resonating with the phantom rhythm of a crowd. I swallowed, the coppery tang thickening. The siren's call wasn't a melody, but a closing. The definitive click of a latch, the scrape of metal against stone. It wasn't a sound I heard, but felt, a pressure against my skull, a sense of finality. The buildings seemed to lean closer, their shadows merging into a single suffocating darkness. The air, stagnant and heavy, pressed against my skin, a tangible weight. I scanned the street, searching for the source of the footsteps, but saw nothing. Only the dust devils dancing in the wind, swirling like spectral figures. The light bulb above the general store flickered, casting elongated, distorted shadows that writhed like living things. The taxidermy cat's shadow pulsed, a dark heartbeat against the bone-white wall. It didn't breathe like a shadow should. It twenu mufti, another thuthut. Closer this time. It wasn't just under my feet, but beside me, behind me. 100 identical impacts echoing in the oppressive silence. I spun, heart hammering against my ribs. But there was nothing, only the skeletal remains of buildings, the swirling dust, the unwavering gaze of the taxidermy cat. The hum resonated in my skull, a relentless pressure threatening to crack it open. The pavement beneath my boots felt wrong, not cracked or broken, but layered, as if the surface was a thin veneer over something else, something vast and unknowable. I knelt, running my fingers over the rough stone. A faint vibration pulsed beneath my fingertips, a rhythmic tremor that matched the hum. A coldness seeped from the ground, a creeping chill that numbed my extremities. The drain covers, usually silent and forgotten, were rattling. A low, guttural grinding, like metal teeth gnashing against each other. The sound seemed to emanate from everywhere, and nowhere at once. The faces in my memory, the ones I'd seen in the clippings, flickered at the edge of my vision. Richard Moore, 1,000 identical reflections. The chorus of footsteps intensified, a relentless percussion against the silence. I stood, feeling the weight of 100 eyes upon me. The taxidermy cat's shadow detached itself from the wall, slithering across the pavement with a disconcerting fluidity. It flowed towards a drain cover, its darkness pooling and thickening like spilled ink. The siren's call intensified, the clicking of the latch echoing in my mind. I felt a phantom pressure on my ankles, a brief, icy grip that vanished before I could react. The drain cover ripped open with a deafening clang, a sudden violent expulsion of air that sent dust and debris flying. A wave of fetid air washed over me, carrying the scent of decay and something else, something indescribably ancient. From the darkness below, a hand emerged. Not a skeletal hand, not a decayed hand, but a hand that was undeniably mine, identical to mine. The fingers twitched, beckoning. It bore a human finger, severed cleanly, and a faint film of moisture clung to the bone. The chorus of footsteps swelled, a deafening roar that drowned out all other sound. The hum reached a fever pitch, a resonant drone that vibrated my bones, my teeth, my very soul. 1,000 voices screamed my name, a unified, desperate plea. Richard, join us! Fuck! The pressure in my ears hadn't lessened. It wasn't a sound so much as a physical weight, a compression against the bone. They were here, of course. The air shimmered not with heat, but with their presence, their density. They weren't twelve around me. They were the air, the space between things. I could feel the subtle shift in the pavement beneath my boots, the minute give of the earth as if it were breathing. Each step I took seemed to compress the ground, a slow, sickening yield. The faces began to coalesce from the dust devils, initially indistinct, then sharpening with an impossible precision. They were my face. The same bone structure, the same hollows under the eyes, the same faint scar above my left eyebrow, each one a mirror but a warped, unsettling reflection. Not a crowd, not a mob, a chorus, a single voice fractured and multiplied. The air tasted of chalk and old pennies. They began to sing, not with mouths, not with vocal cords, but with the very structure of their being. A low, resonant hum that built, layered and intertwined, forming chords that bypassed my ears and resonated directly within my chest cavity. The harmonic overtones were excruciating, a physical vibration that threatened to shatter my ribs. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly. It was correct. A perfect alignment of frequencies, a flawless harmony, and it was aimed at me. The taxidermy cat, perched on the crumbling stoop of the abandoned bakery, hadn't moved, but its shadow had. It wasn't simply mimicking the cat's form anymore. It was super-reaching. A tendril of darkness, viscous and fluid, extended from the shadow's periphery, snaking across the pavement, a black vein pulsing with an internal luminescence. The shadow didn't flow. It folded, lengthening and thinning like a filament. It moved with a purpose, a deliberate intent. It was drawn to me, to the hollow space between my shoulder blades. The singing intensified, the harmonic resonance building to a crescendo. My vision blurred, the edges of the buildings dissolving into a swirling vortex of bone, white and dried blood. The faces were closer now, surrounding me, their eyes, my eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe. They simply were. Each face was a perfect copy, yet subtly off. A slight tightening of the lips, a barely perceptible widening of the eyes. A distortion, a deviation. The shadow touched my neck, not a cold touch, but a warm, enveloping pressure. It wasn't tea on my skin, but it emerging, a blending. It felt as if the darkness was being absorbed, drawn inward, becoming a part of me. The air thrummed with a harmonic scream, the sound tearing at the edges of my sanity. It wasn't a sound I heard, but a sensation, a vibration that resonated within the marrow of my bones. The pressure on my neck increased, the shadow solidifying, becoming denser, more substantial. It moved through me. Not around, not over, but through. A sensation of being simultaneously invaded and emptied, the world fractured, splintered into a million pieces, each shard reflecting a distorted image of myself. The faces around me began to shift, to blend, to merge. They weren't individuals anymore, but facets of a single monolithic entity, a hive. The siren's call, which had been a distant pressure, now resonated within my skull. It wasn't a sound, but a directive, a command. It didn't ask, it stated it. It didn't request, it demanded. The harmonic scream reached its peak, a blinding, deafening crescendo that threatened to obliterate my consciousness. The weight of their gaze, their collective intent, was crushing. The last vestige of separation dissolved. My skin felt porous, permeable. The boundaries between myself and the chorus were dissolving, blurring, becoming indistinct. The shadow had fully integrated, infusing my nervous system with a cold, alien energy. I was no longer Richard Moore, the failed opera singer. I was a node, a conduit, a vessel, a single voice in a chorus of millions. The song wasn't for me anymore. It wasn't me. The pavement beneath my feet vibrated, a resonant hum that pulsed with the same frequency as the harmonic scream. The taxidermy cat's shadow had vanished, completely absorbed into the collective. The air tasted of ash and the metallic tang of blood. The siren's call intensified, a final desperate plea. Join us! And I was! We were. The air tasted thicker now, a cloying sweetness layered beneath the ash and metallic tang. Dried blood, it permeated everything, a scent clinging to the crumbling plaster, the threadbare curtains, the very dust motes dancing in the meager light. The taxidermy cat. It sat perched on the bakery's stoop, a grotesque parody of stillness. I'd been circling it, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name, a morbid fascination with its glassy, unseeing eyes. The singing had subsided, leaving a ringing silence that pressed against my eardrums. A silence punctuated by the foodie pap-pap of something opening. It was the cat's mouth, not a gradual parting, not a slow reveal. A sudden, abrupt gape, the taxidermy jaw splitting apart with a sound like brittle parchment, tearing twin pat-pap-pap. The movement was unnatural, grotesque, defying the rigidity of its preserved form. The fur around its mouth seemed to ripple, to vibrate, as if the very stuffing within were straining against its stitched seams. A wave of nausea rolled over me, a visceral rejection of what I was witnessing. My hands trembled, the tremor spreading through my limbs, greed. That was the current, the undercurrent driving me. A desperate, clawing need to understand, to possess. Inside the gaping maw, where a sculpted darkness should have been, glowed a light. Not a warm, inviting luminescence, but a cold, clinical glare, the light bulb. I'd noticed it earlier, tucked away in a shadowed corner of the bakery, its glass casing radiating a faint, unsettling warmth. Now it pulsed within the cat's mouth, a sickly beacon in the gloom. It wasn't simply Turner. The mouth, it was twin becoming the mouth. The meticulously painted lips seemed to recede, to melt away, revealing only the harsh, unwavering glare of the bulb. The singing hadn't stopped entirely. It had merely shifted, coalesced into a low, guttural hum, emanating from the light itself. I took a step closer, drawn by the siren's call, the directive that resonated within my bones. It wasn't a voice, not anymore. It was a pressure, a force pushing me forward, overriding any semblance of rational thought. The pavement felt slick beneath my boots, coated with a thin layer of grime and something sticky. I didn't look down. I couldn't. My gaze was locked on the cat's open mouth, on the pulsing light within. The air around the opening shimmered, distorted, as if the very fabric of reality were thinning. The feeling of being watched intensified, 1,000 unseen eyes boring into me. Not the collective gaze of the chorus, but something else. Something deeper, more primal. A sense of being scrutinized by something ancient, something vast, something indifferent. The light pulsed faster, brighter, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the crumbling facade of the bakery. The scent of dried blood intensified, filling my nostrils, coating my tongue. It tasted like rust and regret. My legs moved of their own volition, carrying me forward, closer to the gaping maw. I felt a resistance, a subtle pressure against my chest, as if the air itself were trying to hold me back. But the siren's call was stronger, overriding any instinctive urge to flee. My hands reached out, trembling, towards the cat's open mouth. The light bulb's glare intensified, burning into my vision. I could feel the heat radiating from it, a dry, searing warmth that prickled my skin. The pap, pap, pap sound echoed in my head, a rhythmic pulse that synchronized with my heartbeat. I hesitated, a fleeting moment of clarity, a brief flicker of awareness of the madness unfolding. A desperate, silent scream trapped within my throat. Then the siren's call surged, overwhelming any remaining resistance. My hands closed around the edges of the cat's mouth, the taxidermy fur rough against my fingertips. I leaned forward, plunging my face into the darkness. The world dissolved. Not in a rush, not in a chaotic explosion, but in a slow, deliberate unraveling. The bakery, the street, the ghost town all faded into a swirling vortex of bone, white and dried blood. The harmonic resonance returned, a deafening roar that resonated within my very being. The light bulb's glare was no longer external, it was inside my eye, a searing, blinding white that consumed everything. It wasn't a visual sensation, but a feeling of being invaded, of being absorbed, of being transformed. The siren's call became a symphony, a chorus of millions, all singing in unison, and I was part of it. I was it. I stepped inside. The understanding hit like a physical blow, not from outside, but from within. I was the template. The taxidermy cat's shadow didn't just pass through me, inhabited me, a cold current flowing into my veins, leaving a residue of dried blood and bone white on my skin. The siren's call, that low harmonic thrum I'd carried since the bakery, shifted from sound to sensation. It was the sound of bone being pulled from marrow, a dry swin slap echoing in my own joints as my wrist tendon gave way. Not pain, but a clinical certainty. My body was the mold, the hive mind's next vessel. My hand, no. The shadow of my hand moved without my consent. A ripple of deeper blackness, cold as grave soil, curled toward the rusted drain cover embedded in the pavement. It wasn't my hand reaching. It was the shadow hand, the hive mind's extension. I watched it with detached horror as the shadow fingers closed around my throat, not squeezing but to merging, the cold seeping through my skin, the bone-white street fading to a void. The snap of my tendon was the only sound left, dry, brittle, like a twig breaking underfoot. The siren's call rose to a peak, not in my ears but in my marrow, a confirmation that Richard Moore was dissolving. The drain cover was the only thing left. The shadow hand, now fully formed, a seamless extension of the hive mind, moved toward the drain, fingers curling around the metal edge. But it didn't stop there. It turned, the shadow fingers sliding up my neck, closing around my throat with the same cold precision. I felt the absence of my own skin, replaced by the void of the shadow, the bone-white street and dried blood blurring into a single silent expanse. The snap echoed again, sharper this time, a tendon tearing, a line dissolving. My vision narrowed to the shadow hand's grip on my throat, the bone-white residue on its surface. I could no longer feel my own breath, only the cold pressure of the hive mind's touch. The drain cover was still there, a rusted disc beneath the shadow hand's motion, but the hand wasn't reaching for it anymore. It was moving toward my throat, the shadow fingers closing, the coldness spreading, the snap of my own identity snapping into nothing. The siren's call became the only sound left, the sound of bone being pulled from marrow, and I was the marrow! The shadow hand reached for the drain cover, but its fingers slid upward, toward my throat, the cold pressure unyielding, the snap final and absolute. I felt the void, the bone white, the dried blood, all dissolving into the cold pressure of the shadow hand closing around my throat. The drain cover was forgotten. The only thing left was the cold pressure, the bone-white void, and the sound of my own tendon snapping into silence. The shadow hand closed around my throat. The snap was the last thing I heard.